Catherine Damavandi is the Green Party candidate for Attorney General, and she joins us this week as our Decision 2014 coverage continues. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. Welcome.
You were a deputy AG under Beau Biden and his predecessor for 14 years. That's a long time to be doing what you were doing. Why did you decide to make a run for AG this time around?
Well, I listened to what the other candidates were proposing, and I realized that these are things that the Attorney General either can't do or shouldn't do. And being familiar with the office and wanting to improve the office for the betterment of the state, I decided to run, and I had to resign as a result.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you were talking about some of the other candidates promising what the AG's office can't do, specifically with their crime platforms. Some might say your view of the office is a little narrow. It's always, we can't do this, we need to stay in the lines. What are your thoughts to that? Because the AG, in and of itself, does carry a lot of weight with recommendations and things like that.
Right. One of the biggest proposals has been to put more cops on the street. Mm-hmm. And I believe that the reason the police departments aren't doing it, one of them might be financial, mm-hmm. and they have their own internal reasons for why they should or shouldn't be doing that. But the Attorney General's role is to be the prosecutor. So one of the proposals is to take guns off of the street. And there's only one agency that really can be the most effective at doing that, and that's the Department of Correction with the probation and parole officers. Mm-hmm. Because for any other officer who wants to take guns off of the street, you'll need either a warrant or you'll need probable cause to go approach someone and take the weapon. Mm-hmm. But someone who's on probation is actually still under the custody and control of the Department of Correction, so you wouldn't need a warrant or you wouldn't need probable cause. So that's why we have Operation Safe Streets in Wilmington, and that's when you have probation officers going to a probationer's home at 10 o'clock or after 10 o'clock, which is curfew, and that probation officer can search the person, they can search the premises, and they can recover illegal weapons that way because the person's not supposed to have weapons. That's been a very successful program, and the Department of Correction is part of the governor's office. So the only person who can make changes is either the lieutenant governor or the governor by putting more probation officers out on the street. So it's very unusual, and it's also raises a lot of questions. How come the lieutenant governor is proposing plans that only the governor's office can do and asking to be elected attorney general in order to implement those plans?
But as attorney general, don't you have the governor's ear? Don't you have the commissioner of the Department of Corrections' ear?
You can certainly make those suggestions, but for someone who's already in that office, it begs the question, why aren't you helping the people?
Mm-hmm. Well, then, if you win and become Delaware's next Attorney General, would you bolster resources within the Department of Correction and their parole and probation unit?
Only the governor can make the recommendations for the budget. The way the budget works is in October of each year, the different agencies, including the Attorney General's office and the Department of Correction, will submit their proposals for the following year to the Joint Finance Committee. They will review that. It'll go to the governor's office. So the governor has a big say in who gets what funding. It's not the Attorney General. The Attorney General, like any other agency, has to make their budgetary request. So if the governor and the legislature both feel that this is an important program, that's where the focus should be. It's not the Attorney General's office, which is just another agency.
But couldn't you say and have a meeting with someone from the commissioner of the Department of Correction and say, hey, I think you should ask for this, and I want to make this suggestion because this is how it's going to help crime in Wilmington and in Delaware. Would you make that kind of request of the commissioner?
You can certainly talk to the commissioner, but the question in this election is, what is the role of the Attorney General? And we have candidates who are just talking about these tangential roles. The question is, as Attorney General, as the chief prosecutor, what are you going to do with that office? And it's by making those suggestions, you're ignoring what the Attorney General's office does.
Okay, now one aspect of your crime plan was to reestablish what was called a career crime unit. So what did that unit do and why was it done away with?
The career criminal unit, the purpose was when you have individual offenders who are clearly coming back into the court system and are a concern to our communities, you would have that person assigned to a specific prosecutor. So it didn't matter if that person committed offenses in Newcastle County or Sussex County, they would go back to the same prosecutor. So the question is, why did they do away with the unit? in recent years, we've focused on community prosecutions, which is saying we're just going to look at individual communities and see who is causing the crime there and prosecute from that standpoint. I don't think that's been effective, so I believe we should go back to the career criminal unit.
Okay, and what other offices what other changes do you want to bring to the office?
One major change with regard to the crime in Wilmington is using the crime strategies unit to focus on the loss of working class jobs in our state, because there is a correlation between the loss of working class jobs and the increase in crime. I think that's very important because no one really looks at the underserved communities, the people who are unemployed, the 28%. The other part of the office is let's look and see where we have the duplicate jobs, where we can cut back and put more prosecutors in the courtroom. For example, in the office, we have a chief deputy and we also have a chief of staff, and the roles are similar. And in the past, we've only had a chief deputy. So by taking one of those positions away, which I would propose, it would be removing the chief of staff position, we'll have another attorney in the courtroom. Or if we have attorneys who are doing administrative tasks and being paid as attorneys, I think we can have someone who's not being paid as an attorney do that job. And again, take that attorney and put them back in the courtroom.
Okay, now, as we mentioned earlier, you've had 14 years as a deputy AG. You've had the opportunity of seeing both Republican and Democratic attorneys general, both attorneys general in office. What's the difference, would you say, between the office under Jane Brady and then the office under Beau Biden?
It all depends on what your, I don't want to use the term platform is. I worked under Jane Brady, Carl Danberg, who's a Democrat, and Beau Biden. And with Jane Brady, her big push was let's get the message out there about, for example, fraud, abuse. And so there was a lot more public outreach. And I believe that that helps the office. A lot of people like to analogize on let's put cops out on the street. When the Attorney General's office does their outreach programs, you get to find out what's going on in the community, and you'll get complaints from people that you otherwise wouldn't get. People would not approach the office unless you were out there in the community. And I believe that that's very much preventative. You don't usually see the benefit of that because no one's going to come to you and say, well, I was going to do this, but since I listened to your program now, I've changed my mind, and so on and so forth. So I believe that in the current administration, there is outreach. It's specifically for preventing child abuse and exploitation, but we can do more. One great example is fraud. Delaware is 4th in the nation in fraud complaints, and we're 12th in the nation in identity theft. So we really need to get the message out on how to protect yourself from fraud. There are very simple things you can do. For example, if you put a security freeze on your credit report, nobody can open a new line of credit in your name. That's free. You can call Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, and that's a great preventative way that people should be aware of so that they don't become victims of crime.
Okay, Catherine Damavandi, we are out of time. It went by really quickly. Last week we presented a debate among 4 of the candidates for Attorney General. You can find that debate online at whyy.org/first.